Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and I'm back with another Covert Operations expansion video. So, I'm a Kards Content Creator, member of the Kards Contributor Program, all of that good stuff, all the usual disclaimers. I'm not paid by 1939 to promote their product, I'm just supported in the work that I do. My content does tend to focus on newer players, but also does some in-depth content for those who've been around a bit longer and like things like game theory and tactics. And in this series, I'm looking at the changes that are coming in the upcoming expansion, Covert Operations. I've done 3 videos so far on the new cards that are being added in Covert Operations. This video is one I got asked about a while ago, actually, because I'm going to cover the rotation. Or at least half of it, and I'll get to that in a minute. I got asked about why I hadn't done one earlier, and I had multiple reasons, but the main reason will be apparent fairly quickly when I explain how I'm going to do this. So, what this video is going to do is I'm going to look at the cards that are returning, and I'm going to explain what rotation is. The reason I'm going to do that is that my content does tend to focus on new or newer players in the game, and rotation can be an interesting thing to wrap your head around as to how it works, what it does, depending on what other games you've played and how their systems work. And I'm going to focus on the cards that are coming in, because that is the more relevant piece of information for newer players. I might come back and talk about those cards that are rotating out. If you want me to do that, at me, comment in the chat, whatever. I'd be happy to give my views, but for the moment, this seems to have more value. Right. So that's the preamble. So let's get to the first question, which, if you're a more experienced player, you might want to bypass this because you might already understand it, and you might just want to get my thoughts on the cards, and that's what timestamps are for. However, if rotation is a thing, and you're not quite sure what's going on, let's talk about rotation in cards. So, when Cards and 1939's development team make changes to the game with the card pool, they do it in a very specific way. Depending on what CCGs you've played, previously you'll have seen different ways that the card pool is managed, depending on whether you have different methods or systems of play, things rotating out, cards becoming illegal in certain formats, all of that stuff. In the case of card, we have rotation. So what rotation is what it sounds like. A number of cards rotate out of play, and a number of cards which have previously rotated out of play rotate back into play, either as they were previously or with some changes. This is a fairly balanced approach, in my opinion, to keep refreshing the card pool a bit, whilst at the same time leaving room to add new cards. So you'll see a fairly large flux of cards rotating out, and then a slightly smaller flux of cards coming back in, plus new cards being added to keep the pool at a reasonable level. So that's how rotation works. Lose some cards, gain some more. It's also used as a balancing mechanic, of course, because it's a way to remove cards that are considered to be problematic or perhaps are going to have interactions with new stuff that's coming out, which we've definitely seen a couple of in the rotation out in this one, and also to bring back some cards that might get some new life with new mechanics. So, that's what rotation is. That's how rotation works. If you have other questions about it, you can absolutely hit the comments. You can find me on my Discord. There's a link down below. You can at me on the main Cards Discord, or most other Cards Discords I'm a member of. You can find me, reach out to me on social media and ask questions if there's more that you want to know. But that's a pretty basic summary of how rotation works. And as a newer player, you're liable to be more interested in the cards that are going to be available than the cards that are going to stop being available, which again makes perfect sense. So what we'll do now is we will go nation by nation and talk about the cards which are returning from their sabbatical in the rotation bucket. So I will catch you in a minute and we'll talk about the first nation. So, As usual, going alphabetically, the first nation that we have is Britain, and the first returning card we have is the 3.7-inch anti-air gun. This is a 5 cost, 1 op cost, 2/3 artillery. It's a limited card, it's very expensive. It has quite a potent deployment effect. Deployment: pin all enemy air units. Now, obviously, this is situational. This is a very specific tool if you're seeing a lot of air. If a lot of fighters and bombers are being used, this could be very powerful. Otherwise, it's a very expensive way to get a 2 damage artillery piece on the board, which is probably not world-breakingly worth it. But with some of the new air units and potential, and the fact that we're starting to see some attempts to make artillery a more interesting archetype, which I personally think is quite interesting, we might see some play from this. But on the whole, I'm not massively influenced by the return of this. I don't think this is going to be a massively prevalent card. Pinning all enemy air units is not nothing, but it is a bit situational, and 5 cost is very expensive for an artillery that isn't actually that sturdy. If it had a little bit more defense, it might be a stronger shout, but it's interesting to see it coming back, but I don't think this card is going to become a Brit staple that we're going to see constantly. The next card that's coming back is a British countermeasure. So this is Aerial Reconnaissance, and this is a 1 cost countermeasure. It's a limited, and the countermeasure is when the enemy deploys a unit, reduce the cost of all orders in your hand by 1. So this is interesting. It's very edge case, but it could be quite potent in a very orders-heavy deck. In particular, if you want to play commandos, this might not be a terrible 1 or 2 of in your deck. I don't know whether you go the full 3, but if you're playing a lot of cheap orders, which commandos will be, and relying on firing out the ping from number 10 commandos, which is the commando unit with smokescreen that's when it's on the board, whenever you play an order, it deals 1 damage to a random target. This could reduce the cost of orders in your hand and make it very efficient to play them out, and combined with the Pioneers, which is the 0-4 smoke screen that reduces the cost of your orders by 1, could bring a number of orders. Like this could make the 2 of those would make Convoy HX 175 1 cost, draw 2 cards, which is ludicrously good, by the way. I don't necessarily think we're going to see it heavily played, but it is an interesting shout in a countermeasures deck. But it's obviously its big use case is going to be in orders-heavy decks, and depending on what we see, how many more light units or order-heavy decks we get, it might see some play, but I don't think it's going to set the world on fire. But it has the potential to be good value. Interception. This is another British countermeasure. It is also 1 cost. This one is counter an enemy order that targets a friendly unit. This card is not great. Like, there are people, I'm sure, who will disagree with me and like, oh my god, this could be amazing when it does X, Y, or Z, but holding up 1 credit constantly to protect a unit, the opportunity cost and the tempo loss from doing this is too high for me. Much too high. Don't think it's going to see a heavy amount of play. I certainly don't think we're going to see it hugely rolling around, changing the game. It's interesting, but it's not super strong. I think it's a relatively indifferent card that probably won't see a lot. I mean, it is a standard. You could run 4 of them, although why you'd want to, I'm not entirely sure. There are generally better things to be doing, in my opinion, with your 1 credit from a tempo perspective, especially if it is not guaranteed to trigger, than holding it up constantly for this. I mean, if you've got a loose credit, I suppose it's a use for it, but you're also paying the cost of including this in your deck. Not a big deal for me. National Fire Service. So, this is a weird one. This is another British countermeasure. Countermeasures obviously are a thing, as you will see from my previous videos on the cards that are being added. First of all, the art's really cool. I just want to take a moment to say that I think the art on this is very, very funky. I like the style of it. The card itself is a 2-cost countermeasure that reads, when your HQ receives damage this turn, reduce the damage to 1. It's a standard card. Now, importantly, this is this turn, not the first instance. So when this goes off, your opponent hits your HQ with 6 units, you will take a maximum of 6 damage. That said, once again, this is hyper-situational, very play-roundable, and even if you don't play around it, if you've got enough of an advantage that this is... If your opponent has enough of an advantage that this is actually saving you, odds are you're going to need much more than just this to get enough control back in the game to actually not lose. I personally do not rate this card. Now, other people might find it useful, and depending on how many big, direct HQ damage things are out there, I mean, it might have some interest, but in the grand scheme of things, again, there are way better things to be doing with proactively doing, which I will endlessly talk about the value of proactive play. This is not proactive. I mean, countermeasures are reactive by nature, but some of them have more impact. This, while it looks like it has huge impact, actually potentially has no impact, and when it does have impact, probably has impact in a way that isn't making that big of a difference. By the time that you feel like there's value in playing this to save you enough damage for it to be worthwhile, you're also looking at this going, but how do I get back out of it? This might just be a lose slower card. Personal opinion, not my style of card. But we'll see, some people might play it. So, let's talk research cards. So the research cards are coming back. I'm going to do this thrice in this video because they're coming back for 3 nations. These all work the same way, and they are nested cards. So this is going to be a longer section where I talk about this specific research card. So in the case of Britain, we have a card called Royal Research. This is a 3-cost elite order. Choose one. Add radar to hand, or add expanded Royal Research to hand. So each time we play a level of this, a tier, I'm going to call it a tier, I'm going to call these tiered orders. This is the first tier of Royal Research. And at the first tier, we are offered a choice. We're going to be offered a choice at every tier. At tier 1 for Royal Research, we pay 3 credits, and we can choose to either add radar. By the way, these are all going to add orders to your hand. Or expanded Royal Research to hand. Right, so obviously, what's radar? What's Royal Research? Radar. Radar is a 0-cost order. Draw a card, and your HQ gains 4 defense. Now, this is not bad. This is not bad by any means. In effect, it's 3 cost, because obviously you're paying Royal Research, but it's 3 cost to draw a card and gain 4 HQ defense, which isn't awful. And if you're playing a deck that somehow benefits from playing orders, commandos, you're playing 2 orders to do this, which is double ping. I don't mind this. There are times at which this is going to be a decent choice. Not all the time, but there are times when this is going to be a decent choice. Your other choice is the expanded Royal Research. Expanded Royal Research adds a 6-cost order to your hand. Hang on, Bear, I've just paid 3, and now I'm getting a card that's going to cost me 6. What the... Bear with me. These are interesting cards. and they're elite for a reason. Expanded Royal Research also offers us an option. Choose one. Add synthetic rubber to hand, or add advanced Royal Research to hand. So this is tier 2. At tier 2, we can either progress to tier 3, spoilers, that's advanced Royal Research, or we can take the tier 2 payoff. So, tier 2 payoff time. Synthetic rubber is a 0 cost order. Target unit gets +4 defense, and then set its attack equal to its defense. I'm gonna let people take a moment to consider the nation this is played in. Britain is known for having different types of units, particularly bombers, that have the ability to have, like, small bombers that have very low attack, very decent defense that you can then buff with things like Cup of Tea. So if you've got, for example, a Swordfish on the board, which is a 1-3 bomber, you fired Cup of Tea onto it, which has made it a 1-5, and then you activate synthetic rubber, it becomes a 9-9 bomber. A fact that is not nothing. This can be an incredibly powerful card. It can be a win con. I just wanted to mention that so that it doesn't get bypassed, because this has the potential to be, in my opinion, possibly the best payoff for Royal Research. We'll get to that in a bit. Other people may debate, but I actually think that tier 2 is a good payoff, because this has cost you 9 credits. So you want a big payoff for it, but 9 credits to get a 9-9 or bigger unit on the board could be huge. There is value in this. I think it will get played quite a bit. The other choice is to add Advanced Royal Research, the third tier of this, to your hand. Now, Advanced Royal Research is a 9 cost order. So that means you've paid 3, then 6, then 9. So you've paid 18 credits over time to get access to the payoff on this card. That is clearly a lot of credits. Advanced Royal Research reads, choose one, add active sonar to your hand, or add Bletchley Park to your hand. Active sonar, again, 0 cost order. Pin all enemy units. Increase the cost of all cards in the enemy hand by 3. Timed well, this is bonkers. This is really strong, which you would expect for the payoff to be worth paying 18 credits for. Is it really super game-winningly good? I mean, only situationally, but at times, actually, yeah, it really could be. The pin all enemy units is good. The increase the cost of all cards in the enemy hand by 3, however, is the crippling part. This is the ultimate tempo thief. It's very powerful, played well. I should probably say I'm using the core Magic the Gathering definition of tempo, which is the proactive use of resources to reach win con. Because tempo gets defined differently by different people. This steals that. It slows your opponent down so much, because if you time this right, you could take 6 or 7 cards in your opponent's hand, make them cost 3 more, and pin everything on the board. Basically, you thieve a turn from your opponent, and potentially several more in future are slowed down. Okay, that's active sonar. Bletchley Park. Now this gets interesting, because Bletchley Park costs you another 12 credits. So the total cost of this is 30. Because you pay 3 for the base research, 6 for the advanced research, 6 for the expanded research, 9 for the advanced research, which is a total of 18, then you pay another 12. So you've paid 30 credits for this card. It better be good. Bletchley Park. All enemy cards with a cost of 5 or less in hand and on the battlefield are put on top of the enemy deck. Right. So let's get real about this, because this is, on the face of it, very strong, but actually, in my opinion, not that good of a payoff unless you are very, very good at timing it. For this to have parity, you really want to put at least 30 credits worth of cards back on your opponent's deck. Now, this isn't discarding them. Your opponent will be redrawing them, so they can slowly get them back. To do that, you would have to hit 6 cards at 5 cost, or some combination of lower cost below, between hand and board, that do this. So this is only useful if your opponent has an incredibly broad board state and card advantage, or at least a decent hand state, and then it has a decent number of units that have value. It can be crippling, but it is more situational than the other payoffs. And again, I will go back to the fact that for me, the top end of Royal Research is not actually that amazing. Active Sonar can be really good, is a little situational. Bletchley Park is very situational, but potentially very effective, but it's also ludicrously expensive at 30 credits. And at 30 credits, I would want it to be more potent than this. I would want it to really have the potential to be game-winning, and this only does in specific situations. Not, by the way, to say that this is a bad card. It's not. It's just, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze on this card versus the other research cards. Personal opinion, but there you go. So that's the British cards that are coming back from rotation, and I'll see you at the next nation. Welcome to Germany. So, German cards returning through rotation. So the first card that we have is the 1 Infantry Regiment. This is a 1 cost, 0 op cost, 1/2 infantry that is standard rarity. I'm not gonna lie, I don't actually understand really why this card is coming back. It doesn't have blitz, it doesn't... I mean, 0 op cost is not nothing, but is this going to see a lot of play? I really don't see it. We'll see if I'm wrong, but ultimately I'm not sure what this card is doing coming back. It's not a high-value card. It's not a card that I'm looking at going, oh yeah, this is exciting to have back in the meta and is going to do something interesting. This is a very kind of pseudo weak source infantry regiment that's... There's nothing interesting enough about it for me that makes it particularly effective. So, I mean, the artwork's cool, but yeah, okay, sure. That's an infantry, I guess. Right. The Arado AR 196. So 1 cost, 1 op cost, 1/2 fighter. It's a special. It is a special. Sorry, I was squinting at the art on this. Is the download I've got isn't that great, but anyway, it's special. Its deployment effect is kind of going to be the thing that we're in it for. If you have equal or less units on the battlefield, draw an order. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to be overly hyper negative about this, but this card is very meh. It's a not particularly good fighter body that is probably not going to do a lot, and its deployment effect draws a card. It does draw a card from your deck, which is nice, because it's always nice to thin your deck and you can get an order, and if you have an order you particularly want, it could be good. But ultimately, this is so dependent on strong synergy and deck planning that I don't see the value in it. And I certainly don't think that it is, even at one cost, with its stats as it is now, it's just, I don't see it being massively worth including. There's probably some order jank combo deck that is going to love this, but ultimately, I'm not overly lit alight by the return of this card. Next up, Lightning Strike. This is a countermeasure. That's quite important in Germany. We've seen Germany countermeasures becoming a big thing. This is a one-cost countermeasure. It is limited. When the enemy draws an extra card, deal 4 damage to the enemy HQ. Right, so first of all, clarification of extra card. This means a card that they are drawing that is not the card they draw at the start of their turn. This will not proc when they draw their one card for starting their turn, which in and of itself is a tremendously limiting factor for this card, because you are dependent on your enemy playing draw. However, I will say this. This is a card game, and draw matters. Almost everyone is finding methods or systems of draw in their decks. And this can combo with some other stuff. Played in combination with something that forces the enemy to draw cards, this is 4 damage. And as I understand it, this is 4 damage every time. So if you can force your opponent to draw 4 cards, 16 HQ damage. Low key, this will probably see play in some burn decks. It's also likely to turn up in countermeasures decks, especially because we're getting the developed mechanic, and therefore this is sometimes just going to be a choice that you're like, well, I don't have a better choice to take, and this is up here, and if I play this, it could proc 4 damage to the enemy HQ, and it's 1 credit for 4 damage is great value. If you've got to hold it up twice to get it to trigger, 2 credits for 4 damage is still decent value. I mean, 3 credits for 4 damage isn't terrible, especially given that you're paying in installments. So I think this will see play. I also think it's got really cool art. We do need to do an art video. But this is interesting, and I think it will see play in some very potent decks. I think there is room to make this card do some serious work. Okie dokie. Retaliation. We have another German countermeasure. And it's an interesting one. 2 cost. Standard. After your HQ receives damage, deal equal damage to the enemy HQ. So, this is very interesting, especially if you can position yourself well enough to get value. This is a hyper-situational card, and is probably going to end up being used in some combo decks. Soviet, German, or German, Soviet self-damage. Hello. If you are dealing damage to your HQ for some benefit, and you can also cause damage to the opponent's HQ for doing so, is interesting. But anyway, I would have to test around to see how many ways there are to proc this is an interesting way, but it's situational. But again, it's countermeasure, and we are finding ways to develop or tutor countermeasures, so it's not an instantaneous non-starter. I'm definitely intrigued enough to see what this has. It's for 2 cost, it has the potential to have some good value. Okie dokie, we have arrived at Reich research. So I said we'd be doing this thrisely. This is number 2, so this is the German research card. Is going to feel very similar to the British research card, but it has 3 tiers and offers you choices each tier. So the tier 1 card costs 3, like the others, and gives you an option, like the others. And your options are add a V1 flying bomb to hand, or add expanded Reich R&D to hand. Okay. V1 flying bomb is 0 cost order, destroy a target unit with cost 3 or less. This is not bad. This is effectively 3 cost, destroy a target unit with 3 or less cost. It's about on par with other orders that are out there. It's a low payoff for an elite card, but there are situations where you might take it because it just gives you an instant answer to a threat. But it is a relatively low payoff. This is not the big payoff. So, moving to increasing payoffs. Expanded Reich R&D. 6 cost, just like the other tier 2 cards. This one is add synthetic oil to hand, or add advanced Reich R&D. Synthetic oil, 0 cost. Gain 10 additional credits next turn. So, this is a 9, get 10 credits next turn. That's context. You're paying 9 to gain 1. You get to do it in installments, so you can time it, but it's incremental. It lets you set up a big turn. And if you have a deck that can do that, it could be useful, but it's not lighting the world on fire from a straight value assessment. It's also not terrible. As I say, if you have something that needs big credits to trigger, or you have a big turn that you want to play, this could be very good. But juice squeeze, as I am fond of saying. Speaking of squeezing a bit more, the tier 3 card, again, 9 cost order, so this takes us to a total investment of 18 credits. Advanced Reich R&D, choose one, add a Type 21 U-boat to hand, or add Urban Project to hand. Right, so these are the big cards. See if these are a little bit more tasty than the Brett ones were. Type 21 U-boat. 0 cost. Destroy target unit. Enemy discards 2 cards. This ain't nothing, especially if you're running a discard deck. Discarding 2 cards that's destroying any unit, regardless of circumstance, also really potentially quite good. This can genuinely delete your opponent's best threat and deny them 2 cards. Is it going to be worth the 18 credits you've paid for it? That's going to be situational. However, it has impact. It has immediacy and impact and the potential to develop value. Let's see the big one. Urban Project. 12 cost. So you're paying 30 credits. Again, this is the scaling cost of this. However, destroy all enemy units. Now, that, depending on what your enemy has invested in developing, buffing, positioning, and using units, and how dependent on board position they are, could be huge. This has the potential to reset a losing board state, and unlike Bletchley Park, Britain, this just deletes them, moves them entirely. They're not coming back, they're not doing anything, your opponent's not redrawing them, they're just gone. It clears the board state and puts you in a position to try and win. So, as I said, with Bletchley Park, the issue is, are you going to be able to get enough impact to then come back from the situation that you were in that made you desperate enough to play the card. In the case of Urban Project, that's potentially actually more realistic to expect. I'm still not 100% sure. Again, I think you will often find with these spoilers in general with these cards that your earlier payoffs are more useful to you than your late payoffs. However, this is not a terrible top tier payoff by any means. It's very potent and could also be really fun to see. Plus, the artwork is quite sinister. So that's Germany. Interesting stuff. Time for Japan. So, first returning card we have from Japan is an elite. It is an order. It is a 2-cost order. Desperate Measures. Deal 2 damage to all enemies. You lose a credit slot. Okay, so this coming back is very specific. On the face of it, this is not a great card. In fact, it's fairly terrible. 2 damage to all enemies. Is that big enough at 2 cost to justify losing a credit slot for an elite? I don't know that it is. However, this card is going to be recontextualized in the new Japan archetype with the scaling benefits into things like... actually, I'm not going to go there. You can go to my other videos and you can see me talk about the Japan cards that are coming out. And losing credit slots is something that Japan is going to actually weirdly want to do in a controlled way, archetype. And this could be a useful tool in that. I still think it's quite limited because it is an elite, so you're only going to get to play it once, and it's not world-breaking. But if you can get a later payoff on top of the opportunity cost of losing a credit slot and the 2 that you have to pay for it, it could be a lot better than it sounds like late game. It is also a late game card, even though it's 2 cost, unless you... I mean, it could also be really good early in the game if you're getting swarmed by tokens. But a lot of the time, this is going to be a useful thing to give you an edge late game. A lot of the credit stuff is going to be a useful tool for that. Anyway, I talk about more of that in my other videos. And at some point, I might actually just do a video on this as an idea, but that's a lot of work, so no promises. But it's an interesting card to have coming back, and I certainly think it will see some play. Next, we have another Japanese order. It's a 2-cost order for Prosperity. Give your Japanese units +1/+1. It's a limited card. 2 cost, +1/+1. Okay. It's okay. It's not amazing. It's not terrible. It's okay. It's limited. You can run 3 of them. It's a buff that isn't temporary. So some Japan aggro decks might quite like this, especially given that they've lost Naval Supply Run. But it's not earth-shatteringly good. It's not. This is not game-winning in and of itself. Also not awful. So it'll be back. It might see some play. Don't think it's going to dominate anything. Next up, we have the return of Imperial Strength. This is another Japan order. 1 cost. Discard all activated countermeasures. Deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ. This is a standard card. Right. So, countermeasures is a thing. We're seeing, particularly Britain and Germany are seeing countermeasures. And being able to counter them could be useful. But man, this is so situational that I'm not sure you can justify it. I'm not sure. Like, I mean, 1 cost, 2 damage to the enemy HQ is the thing that is going to save this. So, for me, if I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this card as 1 cost, deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ, and then discard all activated countermeasures if there are any. So that the big one here is to see 1 cost for 2 damage to enemy HQ, which, by the way, is not terrible. So, despite the fact that I just said it was situational, I'm playing with you a bit here. There are archetypes, there are particular decks that are going to be all out for orders and want to do direct damage to HQ and have ways of either proccing other benefits from or buffing order damage that are going to play this card. Because 1 cost 2 damage is not awful. So this is 4 cost for 8 damage. In comparison to Diplomatic Attaché, which is its nearest comparison, which is 1 cost for the first damage, then 1 cost for 2 damage for a total of 3, then 1 cost for 3 damage for a total of 5, and then 1 cost for 4 damage for a total of 9. So, that's right, 9? Yes, it's 1. I always get confused by the maths on this one, which is weird for me, because it's not normally things. It's 1 for 1, then 1 for 2, then 1 for 3, then 1 for 4, so it's 10. So this deals 2 less damage than Diplomatic Attaché, progressively, but has the side effect of discarding countermeasures. So this is not a low-value card if you are in that direction. If it's something you're going all in for, this could be a tool. Do I think it's going to be high tier, played a lot at top end? I don't know, because it really depends on whether these direct damage / burn archetypes really get going. But I do think it's going to see play. Long range Recon. We have another Japanese order. This one is 4 cost. Intel 1. So, for those who don't know, Intel means when you play it, you gain the knowledge of that many cards in your opponent's hand. So this will tell you what 1 card in your opponent's hand is, unless you already know what they all are. So standard card, 4 cost, Intel 1, your HQ gains defense equal to the number of all cards on the battlefield. Right, so this is text parsing time, because cards on the battlefield is interesting. This counts HQs. So if your opponent has 6 units on board and their HQ, you have 3 units and your HQ, you are going to gain 11 HQ defense and knowledge of 1 card in your opponent's hand. This is a very potent order to counteract big board states. However, as with so many of these things, it is immensely situational. If we see a meta where we are seeing big board states on a regular basis, this card will be really good, in the way that IGN Shinano used to be when it counted all cards, not all units on the battlefield. If, however, we're not seeing big enough board states, the value of this card is substantially lower. I would not want to play this card with less than probably 6, maybe 7 cards on board, because you want it to be round about fortification-ish levels for it to have any real value. So it is situational, but it is playable, and it is a standard, so you might see it if HQ defense hangs around. Right, it's a unit. This is the Takasaki Regiment. So, this is a 4 cost, 2 op cost, 2/6 guard. It's about on par for guards, and like many Japan guards, it has a big drawback. It has 2 op cost, which is very slow. This does not, it's a special. You need to remember that this is a special. So if you put this next to other guards, you need to remember the cost. The fact that you can only run 2 of these. So again, we are interested in the destruction effect. Now the destruction effect here is really interesting. Destruction, your enemy discards a card. Now, that can hurt, or it can be nothing. And it really depends on the situation, and I would honestly say my issue is that by the time your opponent's just deleting your guards, they're doing it because they probably have a win on board and are just removing guards to smack you about face. At which point, discarding 1 card is probably not that great. I personally don't think this card will see a lot of play. I think it is overcosted. It's an okay guard, but really how many Japan decks are running heavy guard? And if they are running heavy guard, they're getting it from allies who have better guards with better value. Glamour boys are looking at you. One more cost, but you gain HQ defense, one more point of attack, and it gives you, and you can run 4 of them. It's not that strong. It's fine. It might see some edge case play, but I don't think it's going to change anything hugely. So that wraps up Japan. And we will move on. Okie dokie. We are back, and it's the Soviet Union. So, Soviets returning cards. First returning card is a unit. It is a limited unit. It is the 6th Naval Brigade. This is a 1 cost, 0 op cost, 3/1 infantry. This is an awful card, and I'm mostly going to move on fairly quickly. If it had Blitz, or something, anything as a redeeming quality, I would value it higher, because 0 op cost is not nothing, and I have talked about this, and there are probably some ways to get some buffs on this to make it interesting, but realistically, unless you're finding a way to buff or otherwise augment this card, and there will be some edge cases that do, the reality is this card is just indifferent at best. It's not incredible. I mean, 3 damage is nice, but this is not a hard card to get rid of. Will it see play? It might do, especially if we see some quite aggressive Soviet aggro decks, but I don't think it's going to set the world on fire. Next, 42nd Rifles. This is a 3 cost, 1 op cost, limited unit. It's a 3/4. It has ambush. And then it has, at the start of your turn, fully repair this unit. This probably will see play, because this has the potential to be all kinds of annoying. Ambush can be strong if used well. Ambush, by the way, is that the unit deals its damage first, effectively, in combat. If that damage would remove the enemy doesn't get to deal their damage. So you need to be able to trade this out, and it will trade well with ambush. And the fact that it repairs itself, we've already seen how strong Winter Regiment is in Japan, which has the salvage repair itself effect. The start of your turn, repair this unit. This is not nothing. I suspect there will be some decks that try to make some use out of this as just an incredibly annoying threat. You do need to kind of realistically get it into the front line, I think, to make it valid, but I think this will see a little bit of play. Not a lot, necessarily. I certainly think it'll be experimented with, and I certainly think it gives Soviets some more mid-range options. It's not a bad card. It's not going to set the light on fire. I don't think it's going to be meta-defining, but it's not a terrible card. Has the potential for value. 89th Infantry Regiment. This is a 1 cost, 1/3 guard with 1 op cost. Truly and honestly, I don't know why this card is back. I don't. It's... I mean, the best you can say about this is it's an early guard, which sometimes against aggro decks could be relevant, I guess. But we have Sickle for that if we're Soviet and playing, for example, Jagro, things that have like 1 defense. Honestly, as a standard card, maybe it sees some play that I'm not seeing, but I'm really not. Like, there are times when I just, like, I think this is a hopeful return to see if a card, which probably, someone will correct me if I've missed something in the distant past of the game, but probably never really saw that much play. See if it can get some more in a new meta. I don't think it will. I don't think it's super strong. I don't think it's got much of a redeeming feature. I will say it has got a fairly funky looking piece of art, but yeah, I'm underwhelmed. Next, we have Lesser of Two Evils. This is a Soviet order. It's a 2-cost order. Draw 2 cards, then choose and discard a card. It's limited. So, firstly, this is card draw but at a price, which is not a design space I mind. The fact that you're discarding one of the 2 cards that you draw, however, can hurt you. 2 cost, draw 2 cards, but it's effectively 2 cost for 1 card. And lose another, it's okay. However, do not sleep on the fact that discard decks by Japan, self-discard, are a thing. In that, with a Soviet ally, this could be strong with a Soviet ally in a Japan self-discard focused deck. It really could, because this gives you the chance to draw and trigger discard effects. If your deck's stacked right, this could be good. It also plays into the, I think it's supply chain, if you're using it, which is that if it's discarded, you add 2 copies of it to your hand order that also draws a card. There are ways that this could be used, but this is a combo card. It needs something to support it. There are some cards out there that it can be supported by and it could be supported by, but this is a tech deck kind of a card that you build into this. But it is interesting to see it back, and I will say the art is quite fun. So now we get another unit. This is the MiG-3. This is a 4-cost, 2-op cost, 4/4 fighter. It's limited. And on the face of it, it's really not great. It doesn't have blitz, it's only 4/4, and it's 2-op cost. However, the text in the current meta, or at least the potential developing meta, could be interesting. In your hand, this unit costs 2 less each time an enemy countermeasure triggers. This is an answer to countermeasure effects, in that if 2 countermeasures trigger, this is free. This is a 0-cost 4/4 aircraft. Or a 2-cost 4/4 aircraft if only 1 countermeasure is triggered. Honestly, that's not terrible value. So, depending on what the meta looks like and what what space is available in the Soviet decks that are contesting the meta when countermeasures is a thing in the meta, and I'm on the hill that says it's going to be, at least for a while, there are cards, often clearing, that mean that we're going to see countermeasures get heavy play. Aufklärung, if you go and watch part 2 of my videos, you'll see me talk about it. It's a German card that is going to enable very powerful countermeasures archetypes. This could be an interesting answer if Soviet decks have room to run it. So not for nothing, this card is worth at least keeping an eye on. On the face of it, it's not amazing, it's a little underwhelming and quite situational. But with countermeasures becoming more of a thing, it could gain value. Right, that's the Soviet cards. So we're getting there. We're one more nation to go. I will catch you there. Okie dokie. We have arrived at the United States, the land of the free. And yeah, I did that. Don't sue me. First US card returning is an order. It's a 1-cost order, Land of the Free. It's a standard order. Reduce the operation cost of target unit to 0. Right. On the face of it, this is not going to excite people. It should probably excite you a little bit more than it does. This has the potential to become incredibly powerful depending on what you play it on. If you have ramped to some form of huge bomber with a ridiculous op cost, and you just want to be able to constantly be dealing the damage from it, this is great. However, there are other cards out there, bolster the ranks, that do this a bit better. So it is not world-breaking. It might see play, but it is competing in an already tight design space where there are some already powerful cards that influence operation cost. Is this potent enough to make its way in there? I think it's a wait and see card for me. But it was a really nice one to open the US, so thank you for the play on words, 1939 designers. Next up, we have Patriotic Zeal. This is a special US order. It's 7 cost, so you would expect it to be strong. And it really kind of is. So, Patriotic Zeal, double the attack and defense of a friendly unit. Now, this could get crazy, depending on what you play it on. If you can ramp, which the US is going to do, to the point whereby 7 credits is not that big of an expense, and you really can, with ramp cards in the US, get to the point where paying 7 credits doesn't bother you that much. This thing is a win con, or very close to. It's a special, so you can use it twice, and it is potent if you have the right target for it. Keep an eye on this. I think it will see play in some US ramp decks. Countermeasure time. This is a US countermeasure. It's limited, it's 2 cost, and it is Sniped. When an enemy unit attacks, it becomes 2/2. Right. So this has the potential to be a lot stronger than it looks. Because, and I will explain why I think this has the potential. On the face of it, this is kind of indifferent, because it's a countermeasure, and as I've talked about many times before, playing around countermeasures is not that difficult if you know the countermeasures that are out there. And this one could, even if you can proc it with a inefficient unit that you're not that bothered about, can actually buff your unit. But the key here is this is not an early game countermeasure. This is a late game, I'm under pressure and I need to remove an opponent's threat countermeasure, and played that way has the potential to be quite potent, because as you get later in the game, it's less unusual for your opponent to be hanging spare credits. Still don't think this is going to see an enormous amount of play, but I think contextualizing the point at which the play with this becomes more viable is important. This is viable when it is less predictable that it is going to be played. At a time when hanging a few credits is fairly obvious and it's telegraphing a countermeasure, honestly, yeah, you just play around it and move on. At least good players will. But it's got the potential for some fun hijinks. Keep an eye on it at the very least. Okie doke, we have arrived at US military research, which means we're also rounding the final bend of this particular video. So this is the US research card, which, like the British and German research card, is a 3-tiered elite order. US military research is 3 cost. Choose one. Add depth charges to hand, or add expanded US research to hand. So far, we know where we're going with this. We've done this twice already, doing it again now. Let's see what the US version offers us. So, depth charges. 0 cost order. You gain an extra credit slot. Your HQ gains smokescreen until your next turn. Okay. So this is 3 cost, gain a credit slot, and protect your HQ. Like many of the tier 1 orders in this particular method of card design, it's solid. Not amazing, but decent. If you compare it to War Machine, which is 2 cost, gain a credit slot, for an extra point you get smokescreen on your HQ until your next turn, which means your opponent can't damage you. It's not bad. It's not going to set the world on fire, but it's not a terrible option, and at times you might well want it, especially if you're ramping and haven't been able to find your ramp cards. Next option, of course, is to add expanded US research to hand. Expanded US research, 6 cost, is 1. Add pressurized cabin to hand, or add advanced US research, tier 3, to hand. Pressurized cabin. 0 cost order. Add a B-29 Super Fortress and high altitude bombing to hand. This is great value in a ramp deck, because it's putting some really good cards in your hand. This is not terrible by any means if you build to it or around it. It's also got a very cool piece of art. So this is not awful. This is pretty decent. Advanced US research. So here we go to tier 3. So now we pay the 9 to take us to our total investment of 18 credits, and we get to add penicillin or 2 Manhattan Project to hand. I'll say that again. We add 1 penicillin or 2 Manhattan projects. That will be relevant in a moment. Penicillin. 0 cost order. Your units and HQ gain 6 defense. Draw 4 cards. That's not bad for 18 credits. It's not world-breaking, but it's quite strong. Units and HQ gaining +6 defense is very difficult for your opponent to deal with. It can put you in a really strong position, especially if you've got a good board. So there's definitely value in here if you're able to get this card out. However, it is quite expensive for what it does, and by that time in the game, is it really going to change the game? We'll find out, but it's not awful. However, its cousin, Manhattan Project. Note, you add 2 of these to your hand. This is important because this is 6 cost and the other ones were 12. Effectively, Manhattan Project is 12 cost, but you get to spread it around a bit. 6 cost order. Deal 6 damage to all enemies. Let me reflect on that again. Deal 6 damage to all enemies. So this is the most win condition we have seen of, because this card reads, once you play all the way through US military research, pay 30 credits, deal 12 damage to the enemy HQ, and 6 damage twice over to a bunch of enemy units. The fact that you can spread this out is huge. The fact that this is not a one-shot. Get 1 board clear with some damage to the enemy HQ, and then you can go to work and you've got another one in your back pocket. Endgame. Plus, of course, 6 damage to finish off your opponent. Or, if you've got the 12 credits spare and your opponent doesn't have the HQ defense, it's just pay 12 credits, win the game. This is huge. It's very potent, always has been, always going to be because of what it's representative of. This might be the best, in my opinion, of the payoff for the big order grow methodology like this. This is probably the best tier 3 payoff. That said, all of these have really interesting applications. But this is as close as you're going to get to a straight. This will be played as a straight ramp win con. You will see decks ramping through credit, firing through these orders, and you will be sat there going, I'm actually going to get nuked. Twice. That's also quite apropos when you consider the very somber history of what the Manhattan Project was. The design and thought of this card is also not small. But that's it for the US. That is the last US card, and also the last of the cards that we're covering here. So, it's time to wrap up. So there we have it. These are the cards which are rotating in from the next expansion. There are a lot of really interesting cards in there, and I've done my best to explain them in a way which I hope will be useful to both experienced and newer players. If you have questions, comments, and opinions, reach out as always. Find the Discord, YouTube comment, all that good stuff. Find me wherever you want to find me. As always, I hope this has been useful and instructive. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making it. If you have, let me know, because I kind of need to know whether I need to go ahead and make one about the cards that are rotating out. I'm umming and ahhing over that one. But I'll be back with some more. There'll be more releases on the card reveals as well. But for now, as always, stay well, be good human beings, and I'll catch you next time.